Namaste, everyone. Greetings and welcome to our satsang this morning. We are discussing the wisdom of the Upanishads. But I want to begin with a comment, because once again, on our beautiful planetary home, where we all awoke this morning in gratitude for the gift of life, violence is unleashed. In this case, on the people of Ukraine by the Russian state and its leaders. Once again, and I repeat once again because this is not the first time we have seen violence unleashed on our planet. But once again, we witness bombs dropping from the blue skies, children dying, desperate mothers fleeing with babes in arms, the elderly struggling to find shelter, and hundreds of thousands, now 1 million more, fleeing their homes, seeking refuge in neighboring lands. We are yet to learn how infinitely precious is the gift of every human life, and how violence defiles its sanctity, its sacredness. Whatever political reasons are advanced for war, war also has its source deep in the human heart that is yet to learn to see in every child one's own child, in every mother one's own mother, in every father one's own father, in every grandparent one's own grandparent. We are yet to learn as human beings how to value each life as we value our own. Sadly, violence will not end unless human hearts are transformed, and transformed by love. Thinking about war, I have come to appreciate better the ancient Vedic prayer for peace. The last line, Sama Shanti Redhi. May there be peace in our hearts. Unless there is peace in the human heart, there will not be peace. But that prayer is also so comprehensive. We better understand it today. It prays for peace in the skies, because that's also where we are violent. It prays for peace in the waters. That's also where we fight wars. It prays for peace in the forest, in nature, because in war we also destroy our environment. We also destroy the beauty of our natural world. So I begin today with this short reflection and ask that we keep those who are the victims of violence in our hearts and in our minds, as I begin, as I do, with Shanti mantras, peace prayers from the Vedas. Om Shanno Mitra Shamvarunaha Shanno Bhavatvaryama Shanna Indro Brihaspatihi Shanno Vishnurukramaha. Namo Brahmane. Namaste Vayo. Tvameva Pratyaksham Brahmasi. Tvameva Pratyaksham Brahma Vadishyami. Ritam Vadishyami. Satyam Vadishyami. Tanmamavatu. Tadvaktaramavatu. Avatu Mam. Avatu Bhaktaram. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Bhadram Karnebhi Srunuyama Deva. Bhadram Pashyamakshabhiryajatraha. Sthirairangaistuštuvagum sastunubhihi. Vyashema Devahitam Yadayuhu. Swasti na Indro Vridhasravaha. Swasti na Pusha Vishwavedaha. Swasti nastaksho Arishtanemihi. Swasti no Brihaspatir Dadatu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Sahana Vavatu. Sahanau Bhunaktu. Sahaviryam Karavavahai. Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So namaste and greetings to each one of you. I know you're joining us from many different places this morning. Friends here in Minnesota, in Florida, in Trinidad, in Toronto. Welcome to all of you. Today we will continue discussing a different dialogue in the Upanishads. So far, we have discussed two Upanishadic encounters. We started with the discussion between Maitreyi and Yajnavalkya, which centered on the significance and the limits of wealth in human life. And then last week, we moved to the discussion between Shvetaketu, the young graduate, and his father, Aruni. And we looked in particular at one of the most thoughtful and instructive examples in the Upanishads, where Aruni, the teacher, asked his son Shvetaketu to break the seeds of the banyan tree. He broke the seed until he could see nothing further, until he had reached, relatively speaking, that level in the nature of the seed that was no longer available for the senses, for touching, for seeing. When he said, I see nothing, his father replied, that which you say you cannot see is in fact that from which this banyan tree has come. That is its truth, that is its reality, that's the truth, that's the reality of everything that exists, and that is what you are, that Tvamasi. That dialogue comes from the Chandogya Upanishad. And the dialogue that I want to discuss with you this morning also comes from Chandogya Upanishad, chapter 7 of Chandogya Upanishad. Aruni and Shvetaketu dialogue, you will find that in chapter 6 of the Chandogya Upanishad. So chapter 7 of Chandogya begins with a visit by a great scholar, well known in various Hindu texts, Narada. I'm sure Most of you have heard the name of Narada. So this conversation begins with a visit by Narada to his teacher, Sanatkumara. As I said, Narada is a very well-known figure in the Hindu tradition, known for his vast learning. So he goes to Sanatkumara and says, Bhagavaha, revered one, adhihi iti, please teach me. Please teach me, revered one. It is an extremely brief request by Narada, adhihi iti, please teach me. He doesn't clarify his reason for coming to Sanatkumara or the specific kind of knowledge that he is seeking from Sanatkumara. Simply, please teach me. So how does a teacher respond? Just think about it. If you are approached by someone with such a request, adhihi, please teach me, what would you say? How would you respond? So a wise teacher would obviously want further information about the student in order to identify what is this student really seeking? What kind of knowledge is he asking for? What has brought him to me? Especially if the student is a student like Narada, someone famous for his learning. Why does he come to Sanatkumara and asks to be taught? So it's very common in the Upanishads for the teachers to ask further questions before instructing, before teaching. So after Narada asks his question, as I said, Bhagavaha, adhihi, please teach me, Sanatkumara said to him, Yat vetha tena ma upasida, tatha urdvam te vakshyami iti. Tamha uvacha. Sanatkumara said, Yat vetha tena ma upasida. Please tell me, Narada, what you already know. What knowledge do you possess? Yam vetha. What do you know? Tell me that. Tena ma upasida. Tell me all that you know. And tatha urdvam te vakshyami iti. Then alone I can teach you. I want to know what you know so that I can teach you. Interesting. When we study these texts, we study them, of course, for the contents, but many of us here in this satsang this morning teach in one way or the other, whether it's in the schools of engineering, environmental science, or medicine. We all have roles as teachers, and we can't but observe that the Upanishads are also rich in what we would call in pedagogy, in discussing effective teaching methods. And we see a good example here in this Chandogya text. Why does he request him to summarize the subjects that he has already mastered before instructing? So we know that good teaching, a good teaching method, is a process of moving from the known to the unknown. A teacher leads a student to new insights by building upon, by utilizing what is already known by the student. And this is why Sanatkumar asks him, please tell me what you know. It is also part of Sanatkumar's character as a good teacher to want to know his student better. In the Upanishads, in addition to these effective teaching strategies, knowledge was always transmitted in a personal relationship, the guru-shishya relationship. Teachers got to know their students. It was not an impersonal system of instruction. They were invested in understanding each student as individual human beings. What brought you to me? Who are you? Such understanding enabled them to be more effective instructors. This is one of the reasons why, Upanishadic teaching was never mass, public, anonymous instruction. It was always knowledge shared in the context of a deep, mutually respectful relationship. So it is only by knowing Narada's academic history, if I put it in that way, that Sanatkumara could teach him something new. So then Narada responds by providing an exhaustive list, which is very interesting, in Chandogya Upanishad, of his fields of knowledge. It is interesting for many reasons. Of course, it shows Narada's vast learning, but it also shows, the kind of study that was being done in ancient Indian society. So he says, Bhagavaha, O Revered One, Adhyemi, this is what I know, this is what I have studied. Rig Veda, Yajur Vedam, Sam Vedam, Atharvayanam, Chaturtham. So I studied Rig Veda, I've studied Yajur Veda, I've studied Sama Veda, and the fourth, Atharva. Itihasa, Puranam, Panchamam. I've also studied Itihasa and the Puranas. So Itihasas, usually the term usually refers to Ramayana, Mahabharata, and of course we have the 18 Puranas. So I've studied the Ramayana, Mahabharata, I've studied the Puranas. Pitriyam, I have studied the rituals, especially those that are offered on behalf of ancestors. Pitriyam. I have studied Rasim, ancient mathematics. Daivam, I have studied, phenomena in the skies, meteors, some have translated. Nidhim, I have studied the nature of underground resources, perhaps, water resources. Vakyo Vakyam, I have studied logic. Ekayanam, ethics, moral science. Deva Vidyam, considered to be astrology. Brahma Vidam, the Upanishads, knowledge of Brahman. Bhuta Vidam, the elements, geology, etc. Shatra Vidyam, warfare. Nakshatra Vidyam, astronomy. Sarpa Vidyam, I've studied the nature of reptiles. Devajana Vidyam, fine arts, Bhagavaha, Etat Adhyemi. I know all of this. Very little must have could be left out there. So he gives a very comprehensive list of all that he studied. He would be considered as a Renaissance man, a very learned person of his times, one who dedicated himself to learning. So what brought him to Sanatkumara? That question still remains. Why are you here? If your knowledge is so vast, why are you at my ashram? What brings you to me? And what Narada says next gets to the heart of this question. His answer is a very deeply human one. It is an extraordinary declaration on the part of one of the greatest scholars of all times. He says, Bhagavaha sa aham mantravit. Though I have studied much, I am what he calls, I am a mantravit. I know the mantras. We'll analyze this a little more later. Let's just take the word that Narada himself uses. Saha aham mantravit. I know the mantras. Mantravit. Na atmavit. Aham mantravit. You can understand the Sanskrit. It is very simple. Sa aham mantravit na atmavit. I don't know the Atma. I know nothing about what the tradition speaks of as Atma, na Atmavit. But Bhagavat Trishyebhya. But I have heard Bhagavat Drishyebhya Tarati Shokam Atmavit iti. Tarati Shokam Atmavit. Shoka means sorrow, suffering. But I have heard that those who know the Atma, Atmavit they are called, Tarati Shokam, that they overcome sorrow. So I've heard that. Then why did you come to me? If that's what you've heard. Bhagavaha, he says, Sa aham sochami. I have come because I am in sorrow. I am suffering. Sa aham sochami. I am in sorrow. I am suffering. Tamma Bhagavan sokasya param tarayatu. Please free me from suffering. Take my suffering away. Help me to overcome my sorrow. Shokasya param tarayatu iti. And then Sanatkumara says to him, Yadvai kincha etat adhyagistaha etat nama. What you have learned, we'll come back to that. What you have learned, Narada, are only words. And this is the problem. So here we have in this Upanishad a very moving, powerful confession by a great scholar. It reflects or takes great humility, honesty on the part of such a learned person, given the arrogance that scholarship and learning often carries with it. It takes great humility, great vinaya, to come before a teacher and to say, that my vast learning has not helped me to overcome my sorrow, my suffering, and to ask for help. Narada's sorrow, shoka is the word he used. Narada's shoka, his suffering, is a special kind of suffering. He is not ill. It is not the suffering or the shoka that is caused by physical illness. It is not the suffering that is caused by lack of wealth, artha, or lack of fame, yashaha, or pleasure, karma. What is his suffering? That his vast knowledge has not helped him to overcome. This is a suffering that a human being experiences in spite of being in good health, in spite of wealth, in spite of pleasure, power, achievements of all kinds in life. There is something significant here about the Hindu tradition and its vision, its teachings about the good human life, about the full human life. And as you know, I'm sure many of you, that the good human life, the fulfilling human life, has been conceptualized, conceived of in the Hindu tradition as consisting of 4 goals. In Sanskrit, these are called the Purusharthas, Chaturved Purusharthas, the 4 goals. There is wealth, there is pleasure, artha, kama, there is dharma, there is ethics. If these 3 goals satisfied human beings, if the tradition visualized the fullness of human life, the good human life as consisting of attaining wealth, satisfying pleasure, and living a decent life in this world, dharma, and that's nothing, that's very important, then it would not have added the 4th goal, which is moksha. But the 4th goal, moksha, is based on the recognition. It may come soon, it may come late. In our tradition, it may come in this life. If not, it will come. It will happen in a life to come. But at some point in time, we will throw our hands up in the air and we will ask, is there anything more? What is my life's deepest meaning? What is my reason for being? Why am I here? What is my purpose? And when one begins to ask those questions, as Narada clearly is, and when the knowledge that he has does not provide answers, then the tradition says, Tad vijnanartham sa gurumeva bigacchit samitpanihi srotriyam brahmanishtam. Go to the teacher, the one who is srotriyam, who knows this wisdom. He knows, one who knows, he or she knows the wisdom of the Sruti, Srotriyam, and Brahmanishtam, and embodies that wisdom one in whom that wisdom is expressed in life. That's truly when the religious life in earnest starts. The Bhagavad Gita offers a classification of the religious life. For many, and doesn't condemn anyone who's aspiring after these goals. But the text mentions that for many people, describes them as arthas. For many people, the purpose of religion, the religious life, is centered on seeking divine help for acquisitions in this world. Acquisitions in this world, artha, they are artha type. And then there are those who turn to divine reality in order to overcome problems in this world. They are related, artha, arthati. Narada was not doing that. He didn't come to Sanatkumara to seek help for a acquisition in this world or for overcoming some kind of material or other problems that he had in this life. He came to Sanatkumara as a jigyasu. This is the term used in the Bhagavad Gita. Artha, arthati, jigyasu. One seeking understanding, seeking knowledge to overcome a condition of sorrow that he experienced in spite of all of his successes, in spite of all of his achievements in this world. He experienced this shoka, this suffering, this lack of meaning, if you want to put it in that way, this lack of purposeful existence. This is Narada's predicament. In spite of everything, he was unhappy. What was missing from Narada's learning? In the Mundaka Upanishad, it's another dialogue, a great householder named Shaunaka goes to a teacher, Angiras, with a question, as happens in so many of these dialogues. Kasminnu bhagavo vigyate sarvam idam vigyatam bhavati iti. What is it by knowing which I can come to know the nature, the truth of this existence, the truth of my existence, the truth of this universe? In reply to Shaunaka, Angiras explains, and this is a very important classification in the Upanishads, but let's say broadly in the Hindu tradition. In reply to Shaunaka's question, I'm speaking here of Mundaka Upanishad, Angiras says that knowledge can be classified as of two types. Tasmai sa hovacha, he said, dve vidye veditanye iti. There are basically two types of knowledge available to human beings. Itiha sma yad brahma vido vadanti para cha apara cha. So he uses two important Sanskrit terms. There are two types or two forms of knowledge, para and apara. Para and apara. Para, apara. In his list of, and I will translate these in a moment, in his list of apara jnanam, apara vidya, he includes the 4 Vedas, phonetics, rituals, grammar, etymology, metrics, astronomy, etc. This distinction that Angiras makes between apara vidya and para vidya is important for understanding Narada's predicament. It throws light, it helps us to see what his challenge is. So apara, which has a negative prefix, negative Sanskrit prefix apara, is often translated as lower knowledge, and para translated as higher knowledge. But I will not translate apara as lower knowledge. Para is the supreme. Para. We say para Brahman, Paramatman, the same meaning. Para vidya is knowledge of the supreme, the infinite, unlimited one. Apara is knowledge that is not centered or not concerned with the nature of the ultimate, of Parabrahman. So perhaps we could translate it in another way. Perhaps we can say secular knowledge and sacred knowledge. Para, sacred knowledge. Apara, secular knowledge. Apara is not concerned with the ultimate or the ultimate nature of things. So it will include all the physical and social sciences that we study, in schools and colleges. By classifying these as apara vidya, the Upanishads is not trying to discredit or devalue such knowledge. Such knowledge is vital to our well-being, to our life in this world, improving the conditions of human existence. Our Hindu tradition is not antagonistic to apara vidya or empirical knowledge, as long as such knowledge is pursued in ethical ways, and as long as the fruits of such knowledge are applied to the common good, to benefit the world in which we live, because we know that knowledge can be applied to human well-being, but it can be applied also for violence, for warfare. As I said, we are witnessing all of the technology that is used to unleash violence in our world is based on a certain kind of knowledge. This is the misuse of knowledge for himsa, for harming and for hurt. We can meet this morning on this platform because of apara vidya, because of our understanding of the technology of transmitting images and sound and across space. So while recognizing the value and necessity of apara or secular knowledge, the teachers of the Upanishads are also aware of its limits. This is the idea. Narada had come to discover the limits of his knowledge. Like Maitri had come through her own reflection which is our first discussion, to discover the limits of wealth, artha, Narada came to discover the limits of vidya, of his knowledge. Just as the gain of any amount of wealth, artha, will still leave the human being dissatisfied, in want. In the same way, apara vidya will not eradicate the deepest human shoka, the deepest human suffering. Such knowledge does not give purpose and meaning to human existence. Just think about this. Technology, which is apara vidya, has and continues to improve in significant ways the quality of human life. But what answer does it have for the predicament of a person like Narada, who finds himself in shoka, in sorrow, in spite of a life of comfort and knowledge? Just think for a moment of the answers that Narada may have received if he went to people with expertise different from Sanatkumara. It's a good mental exercise. What would an IT specialist say to Narada if he came and said, I am in sorrow? What would a physicist say to Narada? What would a chemist say to Narada? What would a physician say to Narada? What would a sociologist say to Narada? What would a historian say to Narada? Or even a psychiatrist? What would such a person or people in such professions say to Narada when he declared, Aham sochami, I am in sorrow. Tamma Bhagavan sokasya param tarayatu. He has urgency. Take me across. Save me from this suffering. If the IT specialist said, I think you need 5G. I think your sorrow is rooted in the fact that you're using 3Gs. Doesn't help. One does not overcome this fundamental problem of existential sorrow. That's what it is, existential sorrow, through apara vidya, what Angiras in Mundaka Upanishad calls apara. One needs what the Upanishads speak of as paravidya. Paravidya aksharam adhigamyate. Paravidya is that through which aksharam. Aksharam is the name for Brahman. Adhigamyate. That through which the akshara, the infinite, uncreated reality is known. Aksharam adhigamyate. The imperishable is known. So he came to Sanatkumara for instruction about this. Because he said, I have heard. Tarati shokam atmavit. I have heard that those who know this one, Those who know this imperishable akshara, tarati shokam, that they are truly free from sorrow. So I have come to you for instruction. Please, please, please teach me. Please instruct me. So you may be wondering on this. I've chosen this particular Upanishad dialogue because it is connected so beautifully with the last one we discussed from 6th chapter of Chandogya Upanishad between Aruni and Shvetaketu. Because it also raises the question, why is Aksharam, that which is Aksharam, the infinite reality, why it cannot be known through secular modes, secular mediums, secular ways of knowing? And the Upanishads, they give a very logical answer to that question. It's a thoroughly reasonable answer to the question. Why do I need a different knowledge? Why do I need para vidya and not apara vidya? This answer occurs in almost every Upanishad, but since I am sharing with you the Mundaka text between Shaunaka and Angiras, let me just give the answer of Angiras. Why it can't be known through the methods of secular inquiry? Yad tad adrishyam, because that is adrishyam. It is not seen, it cannot be seen with the eyes. Agrahyam, it cannot be grasped with the hand. Agotram avarnam, it does not belong to a particular family or group. It is without gotra or varna. Achakshu srotram, without ears, eyes. Achakshu srotram. Tad apani padam, without hands and feet. Nityam, vibhum, sarvagatam, it is eternal, all pervasive. Sukshamam, the most subtle of all realities. Avyayam, free from change. Yet bhuta yonim, yet it is the source of all life, the source of all beings. Paripashyanti dhiraha, those who know, known by the dhiras, by those who have para vidya. So there is an answer of the tradition. Secular knowledge is valuable, but it deals, as Angiras says, it deals with finite phenomena that is observable, objectifiable. It deals with realities that are within space and time, and therefore it cannot be known through the methods that are employed in social or empirical science, since it has no characteristic that can be studied by such methods. See, it is not seen, heard, touched, tasted, smelled. Not an object in space and time. Last week, we discussed a little bit what is the evidence for such a reality. The evidence is I cited, the arguments of Dirac, one of the contemporary scientists. We know that things are not what they seem to be. Nothing that we apprehend through our senses, sight, is what it seems to be. Coming back to the example of Aruni and Shwetaketu, the seed is not what it seems to be. Every time you break the seed, you come to some deeper truth about that seed, about its nature. Every form is not what it appears to be. And what the Upanishad teaches us is that you get to the heart of what anything is. Then you come to that which can't be seen with the eyes, that which can't be held with the hands, that which can't be heard, smelled, touched, tasted, because it is the most subtle of all realities. And that is the knowledge that Narada needs. That is the knowledge that he is seeking from Sanat Kumara. And so in the Hindu perspective, as I indicated in earlier discussions, the matters of science and the matters of inquiry in the Upanishads they're not in conflict with each other. They're not antagonistic. One deals with the realm of the observable, the objectifiable, and the other with the nature of ultimate reality that doesn't have the characteristics of those things that are objectifiable and observable. And so all of Narada's scholarly study was still confined to the realm of the observable, the objectifiable, and so on. Before concluding, one final observation. One of the interesting characteristics of this dialogue between Narada and Sanatkumara is the fact that both in Narada's list of subjects that he studied and also in the Mundaka Upanishad conversation between Shaunaka and Angiras, the 4 Vedas are mentioned in the list of things that are studied. And so if Paravidya, the knowledge of the imperishable, is in the Vedas, how is it that Narada studied the Vedas and did not acquire this Paravidya? What is the reason? It's a very important question. There are many possibilities. First, it is not unusual for the word Veda to be used to refer to the first 2 sections of the Vedas, that which we speak of as the Karma Kand section, the section dealing with rituals, the Samhita, and the Brahmana section, the ritual section, Karma Kand of the Vedas, and traditional learning. In fact, most of those who serve as Hindu priests, Purohitas or Pujaris, traditionally trained Pujaris, would say that they have studied the Vedas, and their study is, in fact, expertise, deep expertise, wonderful expertise in the first 2 sections of the Vedas or the Karma Kand. So it is possible that when Narada described, or when Angiras mentioned, that is how the term was being used in the text. But it is also possible that Narada may have read the Upanishads or memorized the Upanishads In the traditional method of studying the Vedas, the emphasis was often upon, and still is in so many ways, upon memorization and right pronunciation of the mantras. He said, I am a mantravid. Means I can recite these texts. I know the words of these texts. So the emphasis in traditional learning was upon memorization and recitation, not understanding. Not understanding. So the fact, for example, that one can recite, as often happens, one can recite Taittiriya Upanishad, from beginning to end, does not mean that one has studied the Taittiriya Upanishad or the Kena Upanishad or the Chandogya or Brihadaranyaka Upanishad or Ishavasya Upanishad with an Atmavid, with someone who knows Atma, a Srotriya, Brahmanishtam, as I have said before. Because Narada says, I only know the verbal texts. I don't know the deeper meaning of these words. Mantravid, na Atmavid. This is how Narada described it. So that's what I would suggest, in reading, the fact that he describes that he has studied the 4 Vedas, and yet he knew the mantras, but did not know the Atman. He knew the words of the text. He could recite beautifully the words, but he had never lived with a guru like Sanatkumar. If he did, he would not be at Sanatkumar's ashram. He didn't come to his feet with this existential predicament that we see. It is also true, and as a final word, that if secular knowledge has its limits, if apara vidya has its limits, so does para vidya. Para vidya also has its own kinds of limits. I was thinking, I think a few satsangs ago, Dr. Kumar had told a famous story, if my memory serves me right, about the limits of para vidya. You may remember Dr. Kumar's a story about the boatman who was once taking a great philosopher across the river. They got into a conversation, and the philosopher asked him, the boatman, if he had, read any works of philosophy. And with embarrassment, the boatman said that he had not, that he was illiterate. He had not read anything, far more the profound works of any of the philosophical traditions. And this was a man who was very arrogant about his knowledge. So he said, if you have not studied the great philosophers of India, and then half of your life is wasted. Half of your life is without purpose or meaning. And soon after that, the boat developed a leak, and the boatman, the kevat, tried frantically to empty the boat, but the leak was getting larger, and the boat kept filling up with water. And then the philosopher was full of anxiety, and he was full of fear. And the boatman said, we have to abandon this boat now, and we have to swim ashore. Do you know how to swim? And you can guess the rest of the story. He said, no, I spent all of my life reading the great works of philosophy. And then the boatman said, then I am afraid that all of your life is over. That's the limits of para vidya. Both kinds of learning should meaningfully complement each other. So with those words, I will stop. And if you have any thoughts or questions, we can have a few minutes of discussion before.
I can ask one question. Even with the people who know Paravidya, I mean, the question was initially about whether they can, get rid of sorrow, or more more you know what you don't know, so you are always unhappy. More, I mean, the people who are kind of, you find them happy are people who are ignorant. Ignorance is bliss, they say. So does getting the knowledge of the Paravidya make you happy or get rid of sorrow?
It's a good question, Arunji. First of all, and I don't mean, I'm not contesting what you say. I don't myself ever quote that sentence that ignorance is bliss. I think ignorance is a dangerous thing. Because we see the consequences we see the dangers of ignorance in so many ways in our world. Secondly, gaining Paravidya in the Upanishadic tradition does not make one an omniscient being. It doesn't mean that if I understand what the Upanishad wants me to understand, which is the nature, as Narada says, if I become Atmavit, that I immediately know to speak all languages, that I have nothing more to learn. I master all of the ways of knowledge. That's not true. I still need, there's still a lot that I can learn. But this is the testimony of this tradition, and it is the testimony also of those who have come to gain this knowledge. And this is the sentence that Narada himself used, Tarati Shoka Atmavit, that the one who knows the truth of oneself as Atma overcomes sorrow. Not that I can't continue learning about so many different things in this world, but I have solved a fundamental problem of self-lack, self-inadequacy, self-want. Last point on this, in Bhagavad Gita, when Arjuna asks Sri Krishna at the end of chapter 2 about the Atmavit, he uses a different word. He calls him there Sthita Pragya. Sthita Pragya Uchyati. How would you describe this person? And Sri Krishna answered him beautifully. Prajahati yada kaman sarvan partha manogatan atman yeva atmanatushtaha sthita pragyas taduchyate. He describes him as a person who has achieved inner contentment. That contentment is the overcoming of sorrow. In no tradition, it doesn't promise, that if I become an Atmavit, I would not fall ill. I will not age. I will not have to deal with various kinds of challenges in life. But it gives me a wisdom that transforms the way I see myself, my relationships with others, my place in this world. Godanji, you have your hands up.
Yeah, I request for a comment on something I read recently, that human beings, for that matter, any of the other animals or all that, in a science journal I read that each one of those genuses are given enough senses to survive, not necessarily to know the whole world, only to survive. So my interpretation of Aparavidya is the nature has given us certain faculties to know so that we can survive. That's all, not any further. So I understand Aparavidya is, our knowledge is limited because we have not been given any more faculties to know more. The rest of the knowledge comes from intuition or interpretation or extension of what we do by senses, but that is limited because, and I'll stop at that. You can comment if you want to, but it's not at that level that you talked about, but it's something I was curious about. Thank you.
Certainly Godanji, Aparavidya is concerned with, yes, with surviving. It includes all of the skills that we need, the resources we need for physical survival in this world. But I think the insight of the Hindu tradition, which is also present in other traditions, there is a dimension to our beings. As Nachiketa said in Katha Upanishad, na vittena tarpaniyo manushyaha. The human being will never be contented with wealth or artha alone. It's the same thing, Johnny, you find in the Christian tradition, human beings shall not live by bread alone. There is something more. There's a yearning that is much more, that is deeper in our very nature as human beings. And that is when that yearning is ignited, I think the Upanishads begin to speak to you. Shashi?
Anand, enjoyed your discussion today. I think question from Arun was an intelligent one. And the only thing I would make a comment about it is, just because you have that Paravidya does not mean that you won't suffer the pain or challenges in life, but you have understood enough to accept the facts as they are and continue your life in a positive manner. So that capacity is gained to accept the things as they are and realize something that you cannot change, and then you can still survive. Am I correct?
Absolutely, Shashi. Thank you for adding that comment. I agree with you fully with that comment. It gives you a wisdom, it gives you an insight to better cope with the inevitable conditions of sorrow and suffering that we will all experience.
Right.
Yeah, thank you. Bharatji, yes.
I have a couple of thoughts. If we look at what you would call Apara Vidya.
The Upanishads call it Apara Vidya. It's not my term, it's an Upanishadic term, yes.
Anyway, okay. Focusing on Apara Vidya, in a way, our understanding, as we have learned over the years in what we call modern day science, it's basically derived because of a combination of things. And I would simplify it by saying it's a combination of our making tools that are more and more goes deeper, grainier than what we had before. Like Galileo could only see the moon with a telescope, and now the Webb telescope is going to allow us to see the whole universe. Similarly, in order for those tools to be effective in our understanding of the physical world as such, is something that we call intelligence or wisdom or ideas, or, it's a marriage of the two that brings together this progress. What I feel is that as we move on in this journey, perhaps this distinction of para and apara will disappear. As such, as we get more and more into this, it's our ignorance of not having devised the tools and not having attained that level of fine wisdom, you call it. And maybe Upanishads and many other ancient traditions are helping us to get to that grasp so that we are approaching more and more and unifying. I mean, that's what Einstein, that's what all physicists, they want to unify the forces because we feel our existence is all one. And that's what Brahman we talk about. So if it's all one, it has to be all together. And so as such, I think maybe the progress that we are continually making, even if it is hesitantly and very slow, perhaps is moving towards that evolution. And it may be helpful not to, keep these two distinctions so much as if the two don't have a kind of a meeting place. That's the kind of thought I have, and I want to share that with you.
No, I agree with the trend of your thinking, Bharatji. I think that when we look at these two streams, if you put them in that way, of inquiry about the nature of the universe, its ultimate nature, I think we're already seeing convergence. That they are telling us things about the universe that don't contradict each other. The only thing I would want to add to what you were saying, and I still hold on very deeply to the Upanishadic teaching, that the methods of, and I was very careful, anticipating, a scientist like you commenting. That's why I would not translate apara as lower knowledge, because many people do translate it as lower. I will not translate it as lower knowledge, because that's somehow devalues its meaning, devalues its word. So I was deliberately careful about that. But I think that the methods of science, even though we're seeing interesting convergences with what the Upanishadic tradition teaches about the nature of reality. Using your own example, yes, a lot of it is dedicated to developing instruments that enable us to study much better those things that we could not study with our bare eyes. We are amplifying. Through instruments, we are amplifying what sight offers us, or what sound offers us. We are listening, trying to listen into the deepest dimensions of the universe. But at the same time, I'll leave it by saying that the methods of science are still by and almost entirely devoted to the inquiry into that which is observable, that which is objectifiable. One of the fundamental claims in the Upanishads about the nature of Brahman is it is not a reality that is objectifiable, because it is the self, it is you. If we could see into the deepest nature of the universe, we would be seeing ourselves, but then we would be becoming observers to ourselves. And then that as the Upanishads tell us, is contradictory. How can we, as Brihadaranyaka Upanishad puts it beautifully, how do you see that because of which you see, that which is the source of all seeing? But that's a nice point to conclude on today. And thank you all for joining us. And please let us close with the great Upanishadic mantra, the mantra of the infinite. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnaat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.